Hey, it's Chris. We're talking about Fractured Sky. We're looking back at it. I talked about it before the campaign, gave my impressions, overviews of that, and now we're going back and saying, how well has it stood up? And let's go, right? Fractured Sky, Area Control, IV Studios. They sent me this. Let's talk. What do you need to know? Is it right for you? Where does it rank in my IV Studios games overall? Who's it right for? Who shouldn't it be for? Let's go. 1 to 5 players, 90 minutes or less. Area control style situation with a 1, 2, and 3 player side map, and then we have the 4 and 5 player map in front of you. The main board, you have your own individual player board here that we'll talk about more in a minute. You've got all the fancy miniatures and deluxifications over here for all the factions as well that are beautifully painted. Then you've got the objective deck over here, which has your objective slots and everything that's going to be going along, because the main crux of this game is, well, guess where the stars are falling, and gather them and win those areas. And this is going to tell you, 1, where they might be, 2, where they might not be, and then 3, also, what do you got to do in the meantime in terms of organization on the board as an area control mechanic. Because what you're going to be having is these different areas you're going to be putting down in one of 5 different actions on a turn-by-turn basis until everyone in a round has laid 3 of their big little capital ships here. Big little, I said it. I said what I said. These ships are essentially the main crux of the game. Everything is going to be linked to these, including 2 of your other actions, because on a turn-by-turn basis, as one of your actions, you get to lay one of these down on one of the 3 areas on the map. You grab one of your little tokens, anywhere from 1 to 10, slot it below, magnetic style, and then put it in an area. If you're the first one to go in that area, you get to grab one of the objective cards, the hidden fall objective cards that you may have right here in the blue deck. And if you get those, this is going to tell you where the hidden star is not this time. And you can see they've got sort of the little graphic going on there with these foiled ones. And so essentially, let's talk about that though, because that whole mechanism needs to be predicated on how are you actually getting those stars. So let's take a half step back. Let's talk about that. Let's go to this board. At the beginning of every round, you're gonna have 1 card that gets slotted additionally down here of where this is going to go. First round 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, subsequently more each round. Higher stakes as things go along. So the first round, this one is going to be face down, and you won't know that one of the victory point scorings is going to end up in the Wayward Wood. So if you control the Wayward Wood at the end of that round, you would get it. And so you have the ability to figure these out as one of the actions as you're going along. That deck right here that I just mentioned is the one you're drawing from if you're the first one to place an airship in an area. So you're going to essentially be able to see this and say it's not in this area. So the more places you get first in, then you're going to have more of these in your hand to say it's not in X, Y, or Z. And so you can start to maybe have your forces in the right place, only if you're careful. The second set of things are the hidden objectives. These are the hidden round objectives that slowly get revealed as you progress through the rounds. They're going to give you additional ways of scoring said stars in the first place. These are also going to be face down, but you're going to be able to peek at both of these cards on the top or the bottom if you want to choose to do one of your actions. And these are all going to depend on the markets that you have, the towers that you've built, the ships that you've placed, the buildings or the skimmers that you've used, or how many connections you have. They're all going to be most, least, fewest, whatever that may be, have the fewest scouts on hidden starfalls. So these are going to be revealed at the end of the round, and you're just going to have to see which one it is, right? The most scouts on hidden starfall have the most troop power in this area, have the most troop power in that area, have the most buildings connected to this area. And so these are just going to be put down at the beginning of the game and slowly revealed on a round by round basis. And you get to peek at them using one of your actions. And again, it's not a memory game. It makes it very clear about that you put your token there and you can just look at this one and say, okay, great, have the most buildings that connect to 2 regions. And that'll get scored in round 3, but I need to be able to remember what it is, so I can always go back and look because these will stay on the board. The bottom ones will not stay on the board if you peek at one of these bottom cards and place it here, because you're going to be getting resources if you're peeking there. But then also you get the ability to look at it this round, but it's going to be removed subsequently in further rounds there as it's taken off, and these are replaced on a round by round basis. Because again, you're adding one additionally in each round. So then you're going to have the combination of the above and the below, and that goes then in to the other elements of those actions that I mentioned. Now, the round itself, before we talk about the actions themselves, we get the round ended when everyone has placed all 3 of their airships. The only tricky thing is that number that I showed you on the bottom of my airship here, the 9, you can't have a sum total of all 3 of these, and I believe you actually have a 0 to 10. I mistakenly told you earlier 1 to 10, but you can't have a sum total of more than 10. So you can bluff, you can bid, you can even go over, but it's going to penalize you. The other tricky little aspect that they've thrown in here that was not in the prototype that I played is that if you look at the 1s and 10s right here, they actually have different borders. And these borders can be used to bluff, because if you push this down, you can see that just around the edges, it's actually white. But did they put the 1 or did they put the 10? And so you don't know, because that's going to be, when it's on the board, completely free information. And you have one of those little screens to block it off so no one can tell what you're scheming and plotting number-wise as you're slowly laying them down. Go to the player board here, and these are the other main actions that you're going to be taking. You're going to be having skims. They add 1 battle power to your area control if you've got one of the motherships in that area in the first place. Then you've got your fortresses and your markets. Your fortresses add 1 permanent power to that area. The markets add 1 additional gain of a resource, and they stay out there as you build them up. They tell you the costs on the side here, and you gather those resources via your slight Euro mechanistic approach at the end of the rounds as a reward bonus for winning an area, or getting second even in an area, or third. And you slowly keep track and count up and down with these little cubes on the side here to adjust accordingly as you're going along. And so you're going to have the combination of putting these out, putting these out, putting these out, putting these out, and the peaking as your 5 different ways of doing your actions. That's it. That's the whole game. You play it over 5 rounds and you go. Winner takes all with the most stars at the end of the game. There is an initiative system if you are the first person, because again, you might not want to be, normally in this game, putting these out first so you can kind of see where other troops are arranged and trying to divide up not only what is going to be on there in terms of hidden stars, but also potentially the rewards, because you can see here, Sinister Spires gets you a gold and a wood. Dreadful Desert, 2 golds. And so like if you're first, you get the star if it's there. If you're second, then you might only get the 2 resources, or you might get 1 resource, so on and so forth, depending on the area. So you might want to be first so you can, dictate the terms, but you also might want to be last so that you can go where other people maybe haven't gone, especially at the lower player counts. The tricky point is if you're the first person out with all 3 of these placed, you go higher up on the initiative order for the next round, and initiative matters. You can also see that there's only a limited number of these building spaces connecting. And so if you have an airship in this area, it will connect, a building will connect to this area and this area. So if you have one in both, again, it will affect both of them potentially. But there are not more than 2 spots connecting any one of these individual areas. So when you put them out, the order in which you put them out, do you resource heavy gather? Do you go for area control strength gather? Again, you only have 3 of these, so maximizing what's touching as many is very, very important. But again, there you go. That is all of the game in a nutshell, skipping a few rules here and there. But what do you need to know? Who is it right for? What are you going to like about this game? This game is fast. The action system is relatively intuitive. It's not going to be as Euro heavy resource management materialistic as you may be looking for with these elements, right? There's not a plethora of elements. Putting down the buildings is going to come at high cost, and it's going to potentially come at the cost of, as I previously mentioned, looking at some of these objectives that are the actual win conditions in the first place. And so, you may want to put a bunch of buildings down, but you're not going to be able to, because knowing what some of those objectives are, those are going to get you the victory points. Do you like the randomization though? Because again, with these cards that I drew and with these hidden star areas that are going to be shuffled back up at the end of every round and put back out there again as the ones that are going to be sitting here, right? There's just randomness. And if you're already in an area that gets drawn again and again and again, there's not really any way to mitigate that, right? You can peek at this, but again, you're not going to have the resources to peek at many of these on a round. So which one are you going to do? Do you pick the right one from that aspect of things? Or did you just not? And so that's going to be frustrating not to be able to have the mitigation if you're a person like that. This is a lighter style area control game. It's going to be easier to hit the table. There's a very, very easy rules explanation. As I've said recently, that are you willing to pay a premium for a game that hits the table easier? We often think of filler games as cheap, but you can have more expensive games that are just easier to get to the table with more glorification of the deluxification, if you will. And this is definitely one of those games. You know, these miniature ships painted are blinged out. They've got awesome table presence. But again, it doesn't necessarily need table presence either. It's not going to detract if you don't have it. So are having all of these painted actually going to make your gameplay better for you? Most people are probably going to say no to that, and that's okay. The one deluxification, though, that I will say is the magnetic tokens. I like this aspect. Now, you could just do your old, I'm just going to put this face down that way. Yeah, you could just totally do that. There is some thematic as well as just overall presence that I even will admit that is better having these guys. See, they even run from me this way. But that's just something that's better. Of all of the deluxifications, that is by far and away the nicest, the coolest of them all. I mean, it's completely unnecessary, just like the other ones, but I like it the most by far and away of just that satisfying magnetic crunch on the bottom. There's just something about that. This is not going to come as a surprise, but the element of the player count also is relatively intuitive, right? This game is going to play best at 3 or 4, in my opinion. I'm just not a big fan of area control games at 1 and 2. This has a solo as well as a 2-player mode with an AI system. I haven't played it. I just don't have a desire to play area control games at lower player counts. But I know that many people do nowadays. They clamor for those elements, and so they have done it. I can't speak to its quality. Area control as a mechanic, as a whole, especially at the lower player counts, does not behoove itself to the dynamics that people love about games like this in the first place, the player and player interaction. And that's the randomness that sometimes is the benefit or why people like this game. Because the other thing that this game isn't, right? This game isn't Blood Rage. It's not Rising Sun. It's not Ankh. It's not any of those. It's not trying to be either. It's trying to be an easy, accessible version of those in a completely different way. The bidding bluffing, it's reminiscent of some of those things. The dynamics of the area control, reminiscent. But the question you have to ask yourself is a streamlined version of something like this what I'm looking for? It's not going to have the tech tree. It's not going to have the resource management of some of those where you're really trying to eke it out, right? 3 resources and then just placing them down. There's no restriction requirement. There's no potential take that. It's just you place down and you see who did the best. And again, some of that is going to be so random or just, lucky dependent on the numbers. You just put one out that's higher or slightly lower than your opponent. And you may have the buildings to mitigate. You may have spent all of your actions and resources on peaking. And peaking may have found you what the objective was, but someone eked you out because they saw where you were going. And again, how do you feel about them apples? The resource action economy is probably the biggest shortcoming if you're a heavier area control person from that aspect of things. It's just not widely as accessible with some of the placements, some of the scoring conditions, because frankly speaking, sometimes you kind of feel like you want the resources rather than the victory point, if that makes sense, so that you can prepare better for later rounds as opposed to scoring early in that way. Because you have to take, I believe, the highest reward tier that's available sometimes. And if you end up in a hidden area, that's great, but it also may not be exactly what you need going forward. I like the hidden objectives. I kind of wish we just scored more of them. I kind of wish that the hidden stars were kind of like the objectives where, you just scored more of them on a round by round basis. I just kind of like that element as a whole. I like the randomness because I feel like you got to embrace randomness in games. You either embrace it fully, or if you sometimes straddle the fence on it, you kind of don't get the full benefit of it and not the full craziness, but also not the pure, resource or whatever management. There's a high degree of indirect player interaction when you're placing these down, when you're building on these sites, and as you're trying to bluff or deduce what people may have been putting down in the first place. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's very streamlined. Again, the teach is probably easier than a fair bit of even the other games like Veiled Fate, or even, you know, in some senses, Mythic Mischief. It's not definitely a lot easier than something like Moonrakers, which has a little bit of more of an obtuse corner or two. It doesn't overstay its welcome. At the same time, a combination of these randomness, slight mitigation with the buildings, and the resources that are just always seemingly a little bit out of grasp makes it hard to utilize all of these elements at the same time, right? You're really having to go strongly one or the other. Buildings, peakings, buildings or peakings. And again, depending on the card draw, you may win, you may not. And so do you play this game to win, to outmaneuver, to out-strategize other people? Or are you playing this game for just the enjoyment of what it's bringing to the table, the dynamics of those interactions and the bluffing in the first place? If you're playing it for the latter, this is going to fit really, really well. If you're playing it for the former, I can see people feeling like it's going to fall flat in that way as well. Again, the biggest winner of all of this is the blind bidding. Again, I like that deluxification the best, and I think it's probably the nicest mechanic in this game from top to bottom. But ultimately, if you don't have a 3, idealistically even 4, maybe even 5 player count, this one's going to be a harder, you know, look-see from that aspect with the price point included. Where does it rank for me in terms of the Mythic Mischiefs? I mean, I like it. It's going to be more of a 3, 4, 5, which is sometimes a harder player count. I would make the argument that Veiled Fate is going to be even more the 5 or 6, you know, in terms of players that I prefer to play with. Mythic Mischief, obviously the 2. But ultimately, right now, with just the base game alone, I feel like it's going to fall third for me behind both of those games. One, because I love abstracts, and I love 2-player head-to-head dueling asymmetry with Mythic Mischief. And 2, the Veiled Fate expansion bumps it up a notch or 2 with expansion content that I would never want to not play with now. So this one sort of falls behind because, again, maybe it's my own bias more than anything else of just not being as heavy of an area control person. But again, it's a little bit of a lighter, more expensive area control. It's not going to have the analysis paralysis strategic planning that some people really enjoy out of the heavier area controls. For the price point, there's going to be ones that are just a heck of a lot cheaper for the same weight. So that's going to be the elephant or the monkey on your back that you're going to have to figure out whether or not you're okay with. Is it memorable? Right now, I don't know. Are you going to remember this game a couple of years from now? That's the question that I just don't have the answer for yet. It's enjoyable, it's pleasant, it's streamlined, and there's no convolution of what it is. But again, those elements of mixed chaoticness, randomness, and a little bit of resource mitigation. The resource mitigation leaves me just a little bit wanting, even though the objectives and the hidden stars and the peeking at those is a nice way of trying to balance it out. So all in all, I mean, I liked it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, though. This is one where I could see an expansion taking it to the next level like Veiled Fate. I could also see myself saying, okay, it was good, but is it going to stand the test of time? I don't know. But again, take that for what you will as a person who is a little bit gun shy on area control in the first place. So there you go. Fractured Sky, everything that I have thoughts on and everything else in between. So let me know what you think. Interested? Like it? Not? Let me know down below. Subscribe. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.